Emotions influence moral judgment. Near the end of a legal trial, judges in the United States often caution jurors to put aside their emotions when deciding on the guilt or innocence of the defendant, sentence length, and punitive damages. In light of what we have learned thus far, this recommendation would seem to be at best unrealistic. Emotions have powerful automatic influences on perception and reasoning, influences that can't simply be set aside. This recommendation also ignores the essential role that emotions play in our moral judgments. To begin to appreciate this role, read the following scenario and decide whether you think the actions of the protagonist are right or wrong. Mark and Julie are brother and sister. They are traveling together in France on a summer vacation from college. One night, they're staying alone in a cabin near the beach. They decide it would be interesting and fun if they tried making love. At the very least, it would be a new experience for each of them. Julie was already taking birth control pills, but Mark uses a condom too, just to be safe. They both enjoy making love, but they decide not to do it again. They keep that night as a special secret, which makes them feel even closer to each other. When asked whether such actions are wrong, nearly all college students immediately say yes, typically with pronounced disgust. 2001, they're in good company. All cultures around the world view incest as immoral. When pressed to explain why Julie and Mark's encounter is wrong, people may reason that it is dangerous to inbreed, only to remember that Julie and Mark are using contraception. They may contend that each would be hurt emotionally, but recall that it was clearly specified that Julie and Mark weren't harmed in any way by the event. Eventually, when all possible reasons have been refuted, people typically say, "I can't explain why, I just know this is wrong." Jonathan Haidt labels this kind of firm insistence upon a moral conviction in the absence of reason moral dumbfounding. The way people respond to this scenario illustrates the central thesis of Haidt's social institutionist model of moral judgment. The central idea is that our moral judgments are the product of fast emotional intuitions, like the gut feeling that incest is wrong, which then influence how we reason about the issue in question. We feel our way to our moral judgments. In other words, we don't reason our way there. Reason often follows our immediate gut feeling, serving merely to justify the moral conviction we arrived at intuitively or emotionally. Social institutionist model of moral judgment. The idea that people first have fast emotional reactions to morally relevant events, which influence the way they reason to arrive at a judgment of right or wrong. Neuroscientist and philosopher Joshua Green and his colleagues have provided an illustrative demonstration of Haidt's social institutionist model of moral judgment. They presented participants with morally compelling scenarios and asked for quick decisions about what to do while their brains were scanned using fMRI. Some of the moral dilemmas were likely to engage mainly impersonal, rational calculation. An example is the well-known trolley dilemma, in which the participant imagines a runaway trolley headed for 5 people who will be killed if it proceeds on its present course. The only way to save them is to hit a switch that will turn the trolley onto another set of tracks where, unfortunately, one person is located and will die as a result of the switch. The participant is asked whether it is appropriate to hit the switch and save the 5 lives at the cost of 1. Most participants answer yes with only a little hesitation. Other scenarios were more emotionally evocative. For example, in the footbridge dilemma, 5 people's lives are again threatened by a trolley, but in this case the participant is asked to imagine standing next to a very heavy stranger on a footbridge over the trolley tracks. The participant is told that pushing the stranger off the bridge and onto the tracks would kill the stranger, but his dead body would cause the train to veer off its course and thus save the lives of the 5. The stranger's own weight, it is explained, is insufficient to send the trolley off the track. You probably noticed that, at the core, the 2 options in the trolley and footbridge dilemmas are the same, 1 death or 5, but in the footbridge dilemma, the action is highly emotional. Participants must imagine using their own hands to push the stranger to his death. In keeping with Haidt's social institutionist model, the personal moral dilemmas like the footbridge dilemma activated regions of the brain that are involved in emotional processing. whereas non-moral dilemmas and impersonal moral dilemmas, like the trolley dilemma, activated brain regions associated with working memory and deliberative reasoning. What, then, are our emotion-based moral intuitions? To account for many of them, Haidt has proposed his moral foundations theory, a theory that draws upon analyses of different cultural practices, as well as evolutionary arguments about the moral responses observed in primates. Haidt and colleagues have built from those ideas to make the case that much of our moral psychology rests on 5 foundations or domains that are supported by different emotional reactions. The care-harm foundation centers on concern for the suffering of others, especially vulnerable individuals. The moral intuitions underlying people's concerns with care and harm are triggered by signs of vulnerability and pain, and they elicit pro-social emotions like sympathy that orient us to enhancing the welfare of others, often at personal cost. The foundation of fairness cheating focuses on concerns that others act in a just fashion and is triggered by unfair acts, scamming, deceiving, failing to reciprocate a generous act, or taking more than what one deserves. Anger is the quintessential emotion associated with violations of fairness. It fuels our passion for justice. Loyalty, betrayal, pertains to the commitments we make to groups. It's the foundation for strong, cohesive social collectives, and it evokes emotions like group pride, loyalty, or rage, betrayal. Authority subversion is about finding one's place in social hierarchies. Our intuitions about authority and respect are grounded, as we have seen, in the experience of emotions like embarrassment, shame, fear, pride, and awe. Finally, purity degradation centers on avoiding dangerous diseases and contaminants and, more metaphorically, socially impure ideas or actions. Disgust is the emotion at the core of such intuitions. Moral foundations theory, a theory proposing that there are 5 evolved, universal moral domains in which specific emotions guide moral judgments. When we encounter people who violate the rules specified by any of these moral foundations, specific emotions arise that guide our initial judgments of right and wrong. After the initial gut feeling is underway, people rely on more deliberative processes, assessments of costs and benefits, causal attributions, considerations of prevailing social norms, to arrive at a final moral judgment of right or wrong. We've already seen how this theory accounts for judgments related to harm. But consider another moral foundation, the concern for purity. Disgust is the emotion that arises in response to threats to purity, as we saw earlier with people's reaction to incest. Studies have shown that feelings of disgust intensify judgments that impure acts are morally wrong. For example, people who feel high levels of disgust about a behavior, such as smoking or eating meat, more strongly condemn the act as immoral. Even when the original cause of the emotion has nothing to do with the action being judged, disgust still leads to more extreme moral condemnation of impure acts. For example, after being induced to feel disgust through viewing repulsive images in film or smelling noxious scents, participants will condemn with greater severity someone who's left sweat on an exercise machine, or individuals from groups that might be construed as impure, namely gay men. Haidt maintains that moral foundations theory can help us understand the so-called culture wars between political liberals and conservatives over issues like abortion, gun rights, same-sex marriage, and climate change. Surveys of tens of thousands of participants reveal that liberals and conservatives look at the world through different moral lenses. If you study figure 6.5, see page 194, you'll see that liberals attach a bit more importance to harm and fairness than conservatives do, whereas conservatives attach greater importance to authority, loyalty, and purity than liberals do. It may surprise you, especially if you're liberal, that conservative morality is broader, involving concerns about harm and fairness, though less than liberals in these categories, as well as about authority, loyalty, and purity. These differences help explain why liberals and conservatives diverge on important issues of our day. Consider the debate over climate change. Liberals are more likely than conservatives to believe that by burning fossil fuels, humans have caused an increase in the Earth's temperature, which in turn is causing the loss of species, more extreme weather, rising sea levels, and economic and political instability. How might moral foundations theory account for the difference in liberals and conservatives' concern about climate change? Matthew Feinberg and Rob Willer note that climate change is most often framed in public discourse, including public service announcements and newspaper editorials, as being about harm to vanishing species and care of natural lands and oceans, a framing that is likely to be more compelling to liberals when conservatives are given arguments for pro-environment policy changes that are not framed in terms of harm and care, but rather couched in the language of purity, and are accompanied by purity-violating images of toxic clouds, dirty drinking water, and forests covered in garbage. They express pro-environment attitudes comparable to those expressed by liberals. Interestingly, there's an asymmetry between liberals and conservatives in their understanding of the importance that the other group attaches to the different moral foundations. Conservatives tend to be aware that liberals value fairness and avoidance of harm more than they themselves do, and that liberals value the other moral foundations less, but liberals generally fail to realize that conservative views are often the result of their emphasis on the values of authority, loyalty, and purity. Moral foundations and the culture wars. Part of the acrimony associated with the culture wars in the United States, depicted here in the clash between anti-Trump protesters and Trump supporters on the Berkeley campus of the University of California, derives from the fact that liberals and conservatives differ in the weight they place on the moral foundations of authority, in-group loyalty, and purity. Figure 6.5, Moral Foundations Theory. Liberals and conservatives endorse different moral foundations. Okay, so it's like a line graph, and on the x-axis is self-reported political identity, and from the left of strongly liberal to the right of strongly conservative. And the y-axis is relevance to moral decisions. 0 is never, 5 is always, from 0 to 5. So you can see that liberals really care about harm, and they don't really care about purity and authority. And you can see that conservatives care less about harm, but they care more about authority, purity, in-group, fairness. And they still care about the same amount about harm, actually more than those other aspects, but less than liberals, who they say it's harm is a 3 on their relevance to moral decisions from 0 to 5, whereas for conservatives it's about a 2 out of 5 for harm. Looking back, emotions prioritize certain interpretations of the environment over others and shape how we think in profound ways. Emotions influence how we perceive the world, guiding what we focus on and how we categorize the stimuli we encounter. When fearful, for example, we exaggerate the perils, risks, and uncertainties around us. Emotions also shape how we reason. Positive emotions broaden and build thought patterns, producing more creative thinking. Emotions are also powerful intuitions that feed into our moral judgments, shaping our views about punishment and wrongdoing, and what we deem right and wrong. Happiness. In its second sentence, the Declaration of Independence refers to inalienable rights that all citizens should enjoy, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This well-known phrase makes a radical point. The pursuit of happiness is one of the most important rights, and it is the responsibility of the U.S. government to ensure that people are free to exercise that right. But what exactly are we pursuing when we pursue happiness? Over time, the meaning of happiness has changed. In classical Greek times, about 2,500 years ago, people believed that happiness was achieved through ethical behavior, being temperate, fair, kind, courageous, and dutiful. During the Middle Ages, a period of frequent plagues and wars, people thought that happiness was found in the afterlife, in communion with God when the soul was liberated from the turmoil of earthly life. Philosophers of the 18th century Enlightenment, 1700s, encouraged people to seek happiness in hedonistic experiences and in actions that advance the well-being of many, the idea of the greater good. As psychologists have turned their attention to the scientific study of happiness, they too have uncovered variations in its meaning. For Americans, personal achievement is a main pathway to happiness. For East Asians, harmonious interactions and the fulfillment of duties are regarded as the surest pathways to the good life. Psychologists believe that happiness has two distinct measurable components. The first is life satisfaction, or how well you think your life is going in general. Life satisfaction is based on summary evaluations of your life. The second is emotional well-being, which refers to the balance of positive and negative emotions at any moment in time over a given length of time. Emotional well-being is based purely on the quality of your moment-to-moment feelings. A recent review of hundreds of studies reveals that this mixture of life satisfaction and emotional well-being, happiness, matters a great deal in many areas of life. For example, being happy is associated with being creative and productive at work. It is also connected to better health, as evidenced by less physical pain, better sleep, and stronger cardiovascular and immune systems. Happiness may even increase life expectancy. One study found that nuns who at age 20 reported greater happiness in the personal narratives they wrote as they entered the convent were more likely to live into their 80s and 90s than nuns who reported being less happy in young adulthood. In light of these considerations, let's address two time-honored questions. Do we know what makes us happy? How should we pursue happiness? Happiness at work. Studies show that having healthy social relationships and meaningful work are two of the most important determinants of happiness. Having them both, as do these individuals, who appear to be enjoying one another and their work, can be especially conducive to happiness. Knowing what makes us happy. Can we reliably predict what will make us happy? One would hope so, because such predictions matter. We burn the midnight oil at work because we assume that professional success will bring sustained joy and satisfaction. We choose a career, vacation, or romantic partner because we believe the one we chose will bring more happiness than those we rejected, and we're often right. We know we're more likely to be happier if we have a partner who's kind rather than cruel, if we add salted caramel sauce to our ice cream rather than pickled artichoke hearts, and if we vacation in awe-inspiring Yosemite rather than war-torn Yemen. But these accurate assessments aside, there is a growing body of empirical research that indicates that we're not always so good at predicting what will make us happy. In research on what they call effective forecasting, Daniel Gilbert and Timothy Wilson have documented a variety of biases that undermine our attempts to predict what will make us happy. One study examined the expected impact of breaking up with a romantic partner and compared it with its actual impact. 1998. Students who had not experienced a romantic breakup, called luckies, reported on their own overall happiness and then predicted how unhappy they would be 2 months after a breakup. The researchers compared this estimate with the happiness of people who had recently broken up, labeled leftovers. As figure 6.6 shows, leftovers were almost as happy as luckies, but luckies predicted they would be much less happy 2 months after a breakup, labeled predicted leftovers in figure 6.6, than actual leftovers actually were. Although some breakups are indeed devastating, and divorce has many costs, people tend to overestimate how much a romantic breakup would diminish their life satisfaction down the line. Affective forecasting, predicting future emotions, such as whether an event will result in happiness or anger or sadness, and for how long. A variety of biases interfere with people's attempts to predict their future happiness. One is immune neglect. We are often remarkably resilient in responding to painful setbacks, largely because of what Gilbert and Wilson call the psychological immune system, which enables us to get beyond stressful experiences and trauma. Just as our biological immune system protects us from toxins and disease, our psychological immune system protects us from psychological distress. Freud thought of that in the 1800s before these people. We have a great capacity to find the silver lining, the humor, the potential for insight and growth in the face of painful setbacks and traumatic experiences, and these immune-related processes allow us to return to satisfying lives in the face of negative experiences. However, when estimating the effects of traumatic events like breakups or failures at work, we fail to consider these processes, how effectively they will take hold, or how quickly they will exert their effects. As a consequence, we inaccurately predict our future happiness. Immune neglect, the tendency for people to underestimate their capacity to be resilient in responding to difficult life events, which leads them to overestimate the extent to which life's problems will reduce their personal well-being. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is at the moment you are thinking of it. Psychologist and Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. Figure 6.6. Do we know what makes us happy? This study demonstrated the accuracy of participants in their judgments of how happy they would be following a romantic breakup. The results were consistent with their claims about biased affective forecasting. Okay, so this is a bar graph with 3 bars: luckies, actual leftovers, and predicted leftovers, and on the y-axis, satisfaction from 0 to 6. So you can see the luckies have a satisfaction of about 5.5, actual leftovers have a satisfaction about 5.3, and predicted leftovers, who are lucky but think about what will happen if they're broken up with, predict a satisfaction level of just less than 4. Participants forecasted that a romantic breakup would make them less happy, predicted leftovers, than was actually true, actual leftovers. So they predict a 1 point difference in satisfaction out of 0 to 6, but in fact there is like a 0.2 difference between people who are broken up with and people who aren't. Another reason people sometimes have difficulty predicting what will make them happy is due to a bias known as focalism. We focus too much on the most immediate and most central, or focal, elements of significant events, such as our initial despair upon learning a romantic partner is leaving us, and we fail to consider how other aspects of our lives will influence how happy we are. We tend to assume that once a particular event happens, for example, acing the GREs or landing a dream job, we will be truly and enduringly happy. What we forget to consider is that after those exam scores arrive, or after we have the career we've always wanted, many other events, such as health problems, conflicts with our spouse, or difficulties with our children, will also influence our happiness. Consider this telling example. When people from the Midwest were asked whether they'd be happier if they lived in sunny California, the average response was a big yes. But when survey researchers asked residents of California and the Midwest how happy they are, there's no noticeable difference. We think we'd be happier in California because we focus on the weather and the beaches, but most Californians spend little time at the beach, and it's hard to focus on the weather when your boss is making demands on you, your child is acting up in school, or a loved one has a worrisome X-ray result. Focalism, a tendency to focus too much on a central aspect of an event while neglecting the possible impact of associated factors or other events. Much as our predictions about what will make us happy in the future are sometimes biased, so too are our recollections of past pleasures. To explore this possibility, Barbara Fredrickson and Daniel Kahneman, 1993, had participants watch a series of pleasurable film clips, such as a comedy routine or a puppy playing with a flower. While doing so, the participants rated the intensity of their second-by-second experience of pleasure by moving a dial back and forth. Then, after the film clips ended, they provided an overall assessment of how pleasurable it was to watch the clips. The researchers correlated these general retrospective assessments with the specific moment-to-moment ratings to find out how immediate experiences of pleasure relate to people's subsequent recollections of how much enjoyment they had. This study and others like it have documented 2 factors that influence recollections of pleasure, and a third that, surprisingly, has very little influence. First, the peak moment of pleasure during the course of an event, the most delicious bite of a dessert, the most beautiful sunset during an island vacation, the most gratifying compliment received during a family gathering, strongly predicts how much pleasure you'll remember later. Second, how you feel at the end of the event also strongly predicts your overall experience of pleasure, so try to make sure that the last few moments of a first date you've enjoyed are especially good. Similarly, it's wise for a teacher to end a lecture with an inspiring conclusion, a provocative question, or a good joke. And by all means, don't spend the last day of your vacation running around buying gifts for friends back home. Take care of that earlier and do something especially fun before heading to the airport. Something that has surprisingly little impact on people's subsequent overall assessments is the length of the pleasurable experience in question, an effect known as duration neglect. Whether a massage lasts 20 minutes or an hour, or whether a first date lasts 1 hour or 10, has very little effect on our recollections of pleasure. What matters most is quality of the experience at its peak and at the end. Duration neglect, giving relative unimportance to the length of an emotional experience, whether pleasurable or unpleasant, in judging and remembering the overall experience. The pursuit of happiness. If people's theories about what makes them happy are sometimes misguided, are there things that science can tell us about the most reliable contributions to happiness? What are some principles to follow in the pursuit of happiness? One answer may seem obvious, but warrants mention. Happiness is often found in being with other people. Relationships of all kinds, romantic partnerships, friendships, family connections, neighborhood ties, and links to teammates, fellow activists, or parishioners tend to lift people's spirits. Religious engagement is associated with greater happiness, probably in part because such involvement leads to a sense of community and trust in others. Social bonds bring personal happiness. This doesn't mean that you have to be around people all the time or live the life of an extrovert. A few close friendships can do the trick. Just be sure to avoid isolation. A second answer concerns money. Is it really true that money doesn't buy happiness? Or do people who believe that, as the actress Bo Derek maintains, simply don't know where to shop? There is an enormous body of research on this question, and the evidence indicates that money will bring you some happiness, but perhaps not as much as you might expect. In one survey of over 400,000 U.S. residents, people who made more money reported greater life satisfaction, and the poorest respondents were the least happy and the most likely to suffer from sadness, divorce, and health problems. Thus, money does matter in terms of overall satisfaction with life, but only up to a point. For someone making $75,000 a year, making more money had little influence on emotional well-being or negative and positive emotions. Some have argued that the lifestyle changes brought about by making more money, such as longer commutes and diminished time with friends, undermine emotional well-being. So yes, a basic level of economic success is important to life satisfaction, but making a great deal of money does not seem to increase the quality of people's moment-to-moment emotional experience. A third way to increase your happiness is to practice gratitude, which the philosopher Adam Smith believed to be a key to the functioning of healthy societies. Try to appreciate from time to time the many things you've received from other people, like the opportunity to learn, to do meaningful work, or to express your ideas. In one experiment, participants were randomly assigned to either write about an experience in the past or write a letter of gratitude to someone close to them. At a 1-month follow-up, participants who had written a letter of gratitude were happier than those in the control condition. The duties of gratitude are perhaps the most sacred of those which the beneficent virtues prescribe to us. Adam Smith, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, 1759. A fourth recommendation is to follow the conventional wisdom, backed up by empirical research, that it's better to give than to receive. Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues tested this idea by asking participants to rate how happy they were and then giving them either $5 or $20 to spend by the end of the day. Some were told to spend the money on themselves, others were told to spend it on someone else. Those required to spend the money on others reported greater happiness during a follow-up assessment at the end of the day, compared with those told to spend the money on themselves. This finding has since been replicated in a worldwide study involving 136 cultures. 2013. To experience greater happiness, these studies indicate we would be well served by sharing, giving to charity, volunteering, or surprising others with gifts. You're not likely to spend all your money on others, of course. What about the money you spend on yourself? Do some types of expenditures lead to more happiness than others? There's an easy answer to this question, which is our fifth recommendation in the pursuit of happiness. Focus a bit more on experiences and a bit less on material possessions. The results of both consumer surveys and laboratory experiments indicate that if you're conflicted about whether to buy a material good, an attractive coat, a 3D TV, or to finance a personal experience, such as tickets to a concert or a trip to Mexico, you're generally better off opting for the experience. 2010. When people are asked to recall their most significant material purchase and the most significant experiential purchase over the last 5 years, they report that the experiential purchase brought more joy, was a source of more enduring satisfaction, and was more clearly money well spent. Why is this so? One reason is that we quickly adapt or habituate to the material good. The new smartphone is fun for a while, but soon it feels no different from the old one. But the experience lingers. It lives on in the memories we cherish, in the stories we tell, and in the very sense of who we are. Finally, try to cultivate experiences that can lead to awe. Research indicates that even brief experiences of awe produced, say, by watching awe-inspiring films, reading stories about extraordinary experiences, being around inspiring people, or taking 10 minutes to get outdoors into natural beauty, all boost people's happiness. One reason for this boost is that awe leads to an expanded sense of time. Experiences of awe make people feel less oppressed by the time crunch that is such a common element of today's life. Brief experiences of awe also attenuate certain thoughts, especially thoughts of entitlement and the concern with material consumption that diminish personal happiness. In your search for happiness, then, you might want to put down this book for a moment and take a look at the awe-inspiring things around you: the sky outside, an approaching thunderstorm, a beautiful stand of trees, the petals of the flowers on a nearby table, even the strength of the materials in the building that's keeping you warm. Nature, health, and well-being. Walking in nature is a consistent booster of happiness, awe, and good health. Causes of unhappiness. One of the consistent enemies of happiness is driving in cars and getting stuck in traffic jams, such as this one.